In 2006, a man walked into a crowded bar in Ohio. Security cameras captured him entering. Hundreds of people saw him inside. But when the night ended, Brian Shaffer never walked out. No body, no suspect, and somehow no camera ever captured him leaving. For nearly 2 decades, investigators have tried to explain how someone could disappear from a building filled with people, lights, and security cameras. But the footage still shows the same disturbing mystery: a man walking into a bar and never being seen again. March 31, 2006, Columbus, Ohio. Brian Shaffer was a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University. Friends described him as intelligent, charismatic, and funny. He was the kind of person people naturally liked being around. Brian had a promising future ahead of him. He was only months away from graduating medical school, and he had plans to travel with his girlfriend. But behind the scenes, Brian had recently been dealing with something deeply painful. Just weeks earlier, his mother had died unexpectedly. The loss had devastated him. People close to him said he was still struggling to process it. So when Brian decided to go out that night with his friend Clint Florence, it seemed like a simple attempt to relax. Just a normal night out. A few drinks, some music, a chance to forget about everything for a few hours. No one could have imagined that it would be the last time anyone would ever see him. The evening started quietly. Brian met Clint for dinner at a steakhouse near campus. They talked, they ate, they drank. Everything seemed completely normal. At some point during dinner, Brian mentioned that he was excited about an upcoming trip. He and his girlfriend were planning to travel to Miami in just a few days. It was supposed to be a short escape after a difficult few weeks. Nothing about Brian's behavior suggested anything was wrong. He wasn't acting strange, he wasn't upset. If anything, he seemed in good spirits. After dinner, the two decided to continue the night somewhere more lively. They headed to a popular college bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located inside a shopping and entertainment complex known as South Campus Gateway. The bar itself sat on the second floor. To enter it, visitors had to take a long escalator up from the street level. At the top of that escalator was the entrance to the bar, and directly above that entrance was a security camera. At the time, no one paid much attention to that camera, but in the weeks that followed, investigators would analyze its footage countless times. Because that camera recorded the moment Brian entered the bar, and it also recorded something else, something that made the case almost impossible to explain. The bar was packed that night. Students from Ohio State filled the room. Music blasted from the speakers. People laughed, danced, and crowded around the bar ordering drinks. It was the kind of chaotic atmosphere where people constantly moved in and out. For hours, Brian stayed inside the bar's entrance area. He began talking to 2 women he had just met earlier that night. Their names were Amber and Brighton. The conversation appeared friendly, casual. Nothing seemed unusual. The security camera recorded the entire interaction. Brian stood there for several minutes chatting with them. At one point, he leaned against the wall, smiling. Then something happened. Brian said goodbye. He turned, and he walked back toward the bar entrance. That was the last confirmed moment Brian Shaffer was ever seen. Hours later, the bar began to close. People slowly started leaving. Groups of friends walked down the escalator. Couples exited together. One by one, Hundreds of people passed directly under the same security camera. Brian's friend, Clint, waited outside the bar. He assumed Brian was still inside, maybe talking to someone, maybe finishing a drink. But minutes passed, then more time passed. Eventually, everyone had left, but Brian never appeared. At first, Clint wasn't too worried. He assumed Brian had already left without saying goodbye. It happens all the time after a night out. But the next morning, something felt wrong. Brian didn't answer his phone. His girlfriend couldn't reach him either. And Brian had something important planned that day. He was supposed to leave for the airport. He was supposed to fly to Miami. But Brian never showed up. That's when panic began. Brian's family reported him missing. Police launched an investigation almost immediately. And the first thing detectives wanted to see was the security footage from the bar. When investigators reviewed the footage, they saw Brian clearly entering the bar earlier that night. Then they watched the footage from closing time. They expected to see Brian leaving with the crowd, but he never appeared. They watched the footage again, then again, frame by frame, but the result never changed. Brian entered the bar, but he never exited on camera. This discovery shocked investigators. If Brian didn't leave through the main entrance, where did he go? Police began searching the entire building. They checked bathrooms, hallways, back corridors, emergency exits. They even searched construction zones inside the complex. At the time, parts of the building were still under renovation. Some people believed Brian might have accidentally fallen into an unfinished area. But the search teams found nothing. No evidence, no body, no sign that Brian had ever been there. Over time, several theories began to emerge. One theory suggested that Brian somehow slipped past the camera without being recorded, but investigators believed that would have been extremely difficult. The entrance area was narrow. The camera had a clear view. Almost everyone entering or leaving appeared on the footage, yet Brian never did. Another theory suggested that Brian might have left through an employee exit, but investigators spoke with staff members. None of them reported seeing him leave, and there was still no explanation for why no camera captured him leaving. Another theory was far darker. Some believed Brian may have encountered someone inside the bar, someone dangerous, a confrontation, an accident, or something worse. But once again, investigators found no evidence. No witnesses saw a fight. No one reported suspicious activity. In a crowded bar with hundreds of people, it seemed impossible for something serious to happen unnoticed. And yet, Brian Shaffer vanished. Months later, something incredibly strange happened. Brian's cell phone suddenly began ringing. Friends and family received calls from his number several times. Each call lasted only a few seconds, then the connection would drop. Investigators tried to trace the signal, but the results were unclear. Some experts believed the phone briefly connected to nearby towers due to technical glitches. Others believed something far more disturbing, that someone might be using Brian's phone, or that Brian himself might still have been alive. But no evidence ever confirmed those theories. Years passed. Searches continued. Investigators followed hundreds of tips. Some people claimed they saw Brian in other states. Others believed he had started a new life somewhere else. But none of the leads ever produced real evidence. And slowly, the case grew colder. Today, Brian Shaffer's disappearance remains one of the most baffling mysteries in true crime history. A man walks into a crowded bar, Security cameras record the moment. Hundreds of people surround him, and yet somehow he disappears without leaving a trace. No body, no suspect, and no explanation. Just one haunting question. How can someone vanish from a building filled with people when the only exit is being watched? Even today, investigators and internet detectives continue studying the footage, looking for something, anything that might explain what happened that night. But nearly 20 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. Brian Shaffer walked into a bar in 2006, and somehow he never walked out again.